I thought to start the day today, I'd share a little bit of my own thoughts about public gardens and public horticulture and the role that really I think public gardens can play in community gardens and in promoting edible landscaping. One of the things that I've had the opportunity to do over the last 10 years or so that I've been in the public garden world is just visit dozens of gardens across the country in probably 12 or 15 states. I started out my career in the Longwood graduate program and spent 2 years really taking full advantage of all the travel opportunities that the graduate program offers. I've visited Costa Rica, I've been to California and Texas and all over the place through that program, and it was just a great opportunity and a great chance to visit public gardens all throughout the country. And I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the role that public gardens play in their community, but also the different examples from regions throughout the country. And what I'd like to do today is share some thoughts with you as introduction, really kind of speaking about the lack of a role that public gardens have really played in supporting vegetable gardening and supporting edible landscaping and community gardening. Despite the fact that it's a strong interest point for the gardening public, it's really been a role that hasn't been played up as much as I think it could be in public gardens across the country, and so I'd really like to kind of share some thoughts about that and also show you some shining examples of public gardens that do a fantastic job with community outreach through edible landscaping and through community gardens. And so I'd like to start the presentation with an image that is not something that you would necessarily expect to see in a public garden. This is a traditional farmer's market type of image, but it's definitely not something that I think you would expect to see just visiting your neighborhood public garden. Although it's not something you might expect to see, this is at a public garden, and I'll talk about that toward the end of my presentation. Public gardens are really meant to be inspirational and examples of really what's possible in the landscape. We really focus a lot on the ornamental landscape, and I think public gardens in general just do a fantastic job of highlighting the ornamental landscape, highlighting important plants for ornamental horticulture, and really inspiring our visitors and the gardening public to see what's possible in their own gardens and to really appreciate the beauty that landscapes have to offer. Traditionally, public gardens really are probably better recognized for foliage plants like hosta, not so much foliage plants like this, although this, I would argue, is just as striking and just as beautiful as that hosta image that we saw a second ago. I'm going to introduce you to the kind of the background of the public garden world. I'm going to talk about an organization that I'm sure many in the audience really don't know that much about, and it's the professional organization that all of us as public garden professionals look to for leadership and look to for networking opportunities, and it's the American Public Gardens Association. And in just a few slides, I'll show you kind of why I think public gardens in general have been a little standoffish when it comes to edible landscaping and when it comes to vegetable gardening. There's another group called the Garden Writers Association, and each year they commission a nationwide study of the gardening public just to kind of get their finger on the pulse of people's thoughts about gardening for that upcoming season or just the past season. Are any of you members of the Garden Writers Association? I think there's at least 2 in the audience, and yes, there are 2. This is a resource that the Garden Writers Association puts out to its membership every year, and it's a survey. It's a great survey. There's a lot of great information in it. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about what's involved because, frankly, I think I'd bore you to tears. But the one thing that I do want to mention, and this is really going to be a no-brainer for most of you, is that the public community really likes vegetable gardening. They really like growing plants. One of the things that comes out in this survey every single year is that vegetable gardening is a real passion for more than half of the country. As you can see from this slide, over 1/2 of people who have a garden at home planned a vegetable garden in 2011. This was a survey that was done in 2010. Fully 53% of people plan to have a vegetable garden at home. No other category comes anywhere close to number. Native plants, way down on the list. Just ornamental plants in general, way down on the list. There's no other category that has this high a percentage. And again, a no-brainer. There's lots of different reasons people like to grow vegetables at home. Primary being to eat fresh produce throughout the growing season. It's really pretty simple. And everyone in this audience, I'm sure, has had that experience of a fresh tomato from their garden over the summer, and that nothing beats it. Sharing with friends and family, and enjoying interaction with the community is a big part of why people vegetable garden. Preserving for later, there's an economic reason for vegetable gardening, and then also donating to others. And I think as I go through this presentation this morning, you'll see a lot of examples of this kind of thing with public gardens that are actually doing a great job with community outreach and edible landscaping and community gardens. But I think it's important to understand that the gardening public really likes vegetable gardening. It's really simple. All of you know it. This survey really kind of sends that message home. And now I'd like to talk about the American Public Gardens Association. How many of you have heard of this group? Okay, that's kind of what I was expecting. If you're not in the public garden world, you probably don't know this group even exists. American Public Gardens Association has been around for a long time, and it's really meant to be the group that serves public horticultural professionals. It's a resource for gardeners. It's a resource for public garden administrators. They have great online resources on their website, which I'll talk some about. They also have conferences throughout the year in things like grounds management and sustainable horticulture and volunteer interaction. It's a good group. There's a lot of great professionals who were involved with the American Public Gardens Association, but it's very little known amongst the public. One of the things that they've done the past few years is they implemented a program called National Public Garden Day, which is really meant to build awareness for public gardens. Anyone ever heard of National Public Garden Day? Okay, again, just a small show of hands. We had a National Public Garden Day event here last year. The Smithsonian Gardens has a National Public Garden Event Day last year, which we participated in, and they'll have one again this year. So it's a nationwide initiative. It's really meant to build awareness for public gardening. But I think we're missing an opportunity to really strike at the heart of what interests people in gardening through this organization by really not talking about vegetable gardening and not talking about edible landscapes. This is the APGA's mission, and really their focus is to advance public gardens as a force for positive change in their communities through national leadership, advocacy, and innovation. Now, I have two thoughts about APGA's mission statement that I'd like to share with you. I have other thoughts, but I have two thoughts that I'd like to share with you today. One is that idea of positive change in community. And I think as I go through and show you some of the examples of the gardens that I'd like to talk about this morning, you'll see a real sense of positive change in the community come shining through in the examples that I'll share with you. It's really why public gardens are doing community outreach through vegetable gardening. The other thing that I'd like to share with you about this mission statement is the idea of innovation. As I mentioned in the very beginning of my talk, I've visited dozens of public gardens across the country, and I've seen lots of innovation in sustainable horticulture. I've seen lots of innovation in design. I've seen about this much innovation when it comes to vegetable gardens. Most of the time, when you visit a public garden, and they might have a vegetable garden somewhere on the property, it's a really popular spot. The public just flocks to vegetable gardens. They really like that idea of seeing plants growing vegetables and produce, and the idea of where food comes from is a really striking idea for people, and they enjoy learning about it and seeing examples of vegetable gardens. But I would argue that most vegetable gardens that you visit in public gardens throughout the country could just as easily be in your backyard. If you had the time and a little bit of know-how and some vegetable gardening experience, you could probably do everything that you see in 95% of public garden vegetable gardens throughout the country. I spent 7 years at Longwood Gardens, and Longwood Gardens has a great vegetable garden, but it's not that much different from the vegetable gardens that I remember from my grandparents and my parents growing up. It's just on a little bit of a grander scale. There's not a ton of innovation there, and I think one of the things that you'll see as I go through this is that there's some real innovation that's possible in public gardens if we just think a little bit about what we're doing and try to connect with community through vegetable gardening and through edible landscaping. One of the resources that the APGA provides is a garden search tool on their website. You can also call APGA and ask, hey, I'm going to visit Oklahoma. Could you tell me what public gardens are in the region? It's a great resource if you're visiting different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and you'd like to visit public gardens as you go on vacation. But they also provide this search tool on their website. Now, there's one striking thing about the search tool that really kind of stood out at me. This is horticultural features. These are basically different categories of gardens that you might expect to find in a public garden. And you can search by that, by horticultural features. So if you'd like to visit a sensory garden in Denver or a succulent garden in New York, you can probably find one using APGA's search tool. There's 23 different categories altogether in the search tool. And so there's kind of 23, if you think about it, 23 sanctioned garden types that American Public Gardens Association talks about, recognizes as important. Sensory gardens and succulent gardens are great. They're a little obscure. You don't see that many of them throughout the country. One thing that's really missing is vegetable gardens. You can't search APGA's website for vegetable gardens at public gardens. It just doesn't exist. You can't search for edible plant collections. You can search for other types of collections. Native plant collections are an important one, and people can certainly search for that, but you really can't search for edible plant collections or vegetable gardens. It's just kind of a gaping hole. The public likes vegetable gardening. People really enjoy learning about vegetable gardening. The organization that we all look to leadership in the public garden world doesn't really provide an avenue for searching for information about where to find vegetable gardens across the country. One of the other key elements of the American Public Gardens Association is their professional sections. These are really important groups for professionals in the field. If you're a grounds manager, for example, there's no better place to go for information than the grounds management section of APGA. They put on a conference about every other year. The last one was held last year, I believe, at Longwood, and they had about 100 people show up. And they had a great lineup of speakers. It was a great networking opportunity and just a really good chance for people who are professionals in grounds management, turf management, landscape professionals, hardscaping, equipment, all these elements of what makes a grounds management person do his job or her job well. They can find information about grounds management through APGA's professional sections. There's some pretty obscure categories and some pretty new categories in these professional sections. There are 12 sections altogether. People-plant interactions is kind of an obscure one. Green buildings and landscapes is a fairly new one. But these are sections where professionals in the field identify with, and they decide, I'd like to be a member of that group so I can learn more about how to do my job better. What's missing is community garden outreach, or any element of community gardening is not really recognized by the American Public Gardens Association as an important professional section. Later in this presentation, you'll see several gardens that have great community garden and community outreach programs through vegetable gardening. It's not really recognized by the American Public Gardens Association. Sustainable food production is another one. Urban agriculture, urban farming. These are just elements of public gardens that exist, but they're not really recognized by the professional organization we look to for leadership. And so really there's no concerted effort by the public garden community to address these issues and to really focus and network and provide resources for the professionals in the field who are working on these elements of the landscape. This is getting better. This is the public garden from last year. This is the very last edition of the public garden that was published. The public garden is the professional publication that APGA puts out for its members. It's a really nice magazine. They have decent articles. The last one they did focused on edible landscaping, soup to nuts. It was all about vegetable gardening. It was all about cooking. It was all about edible landscaping. They got Mario Batali to grace the cover of the magazine, which was fun. And they covered some important topics in the magazine. They had an introduction by Michael Pollan. It was a reprinted article from the New York Times, but it was still in the public garden, and it was still gave it a real prominent place in the public garden world. And he was really talking about the local food movement across the country and what a growing entity it is. They also had an article by Anna LePay, one of our speakers from last year's Green Matter Symposium, about climate change and the importance of organic farming when it comes to climate change. And they also had an article by Rosalind Creasy, who I would argue is an edible landscaping pioneer and is a prolific writer. And for the last 30 years, no one has written as much about edible landscaping as Rosalind Creasy. If you search the archives of the Public Garden magazine, this is the first time Rosalind Creasy's ever wrote an article for the American Public Gardens Association. So again, I think that just emphasizes the fact that edibles and vegetables have really kind of dropped to the bottom of the radar screen for most public garden professionals. Having said that, a lot of public gardens across the country are doing some fantastic things with edible landscaping and with community gardening. And I'd like to share with you 3 quick examples of gardens throughout the country that I think are doing a great job with edible landscaping and community gardening. So I have 3 examples to share with you. The Philbrook Museum of Art is the first one. Now, this is the only garden that I haven't visited that I'll be talking about today. But Philbrook Museum of Art got some real national prominence, some national press lately, because in 2009, they tore out a lot of their ornamental gardens and put in vegetables. And I'll talk about why in a second. But it's a great story, and it brought the Philbrook Museum of Art, which isn't really known as a bastion for public gardening or community gardening, into the public eye. There was an interview on All Things Considered with National Public Radio. There were a lot of articles in national newspapers and magazines across the country about their efforts, and it was a real interesting story, but it was one that brought the Philbrook Museum of Art into prominence nationwide in 2009. And so this is the Philbrook Museum of Art. It's really an art museum. If you visit their website, you'll see nothing about their garden. I think there's one little button that says they have a garden, but that's it. There's really nothing on their website about their garden at all. But they have fantastic gardens. It's an Italianate garden. It's very formal, and it's very, very striking. It's a beautiful landscape. However, in 2009, they were faced with real severe budget cuts. And because they're an art museum, the emphasis and the importance of the garden really kind of takes second trip. And so they were looking at a $15,000 budget cut just for plant material for 2009. That basically wiped out their South Formal garden landscape. They weren't going to be able to buy plants at all. So what do? They looked at this as a great opportunity. And their garden manager, Melinda McMillan, who is a real passionate plant person, but also a real passionate community garden person, decided that she would try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and really look at this as a great opportunity to support the local community. She partnered with the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma, and they transitioned the entire South Formal landscape from ornamental horticulture to vegetable gardens. Much like we did last year here at Brookside, they took all of their ornamental display beds and grew vegetables. The horticulture staff, which is pretty significant, they have a fairly large staff for a 23-acre garden, they grew and maintained the gardens like they always would. They planted them in the spring, they maintained them throughout the growing season, but volunteers from the food bank came out and harvested 3 times a week. Because of their efforts, they were able to go from a $15,000 plant budget to a $500 plant budget for the entire growing season. It cost them $500 to grow all of the plants that were on display in the South Formal garden that year. So from $15,000 down to $500. And the best thing about it was that 90% of that budget came from community support. They asked people to donate seeds. They asked people to donate tomato stands. They asked people to donate potting soil. And they got great support because of what they were doing. So because of that, what did they spend? Maybe $50 that year on their South Formal garden. Yes?
Did they try to make them organic?
Yes. Yeah, they grew everything organic. Yep, they did. The total amount of fresh produce they got from their first venture, their first time doing this, which supported 460 food bank locations in 24 counties throughout Oklahoma, was 1,800 pounds. They're planning to do this again this year, and they're very excited about it, and they know that they're going to be able to double that number. So it's an incredible story. The Philbrook Museum of Art is a really small and not well-known garden, but because of their efforts last year and the support that they provided for the community, they got a lot of great national press, and I'm talking about them today, which is great, sharing them them with you. So this is, I think, just a tremendous story. It's an example of what public gardens can do to both serve their communities and recognize the interest level that people have when it comes to vegetable gardening. The next garden I'd like to talk to you about today is the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. This is one of my favorite gardens in New York. How many of you have visited Brooklyn Botanic Garden? Okay, that's good. Maybe about a third of you altogether. One of the things that's great about Brooklyn Botanic Garden, it's a very old garden. They celebrated their centennial last year, so they were started in 1910. One of the things that's great about Brooklyn, it's right in the heart of the Flatbush section of Brooklyn. If you're a baseball fan like I am, they're literally across the street from Ebbets Field, which is the old Brooklyn Dodger Stadium. It was torn down, I think, in the 60s, but it's still, they still talk about it, which is fantastic. It's right across the street, just on the other side, I think, of Flatbush Avenue. But they're surrounded by a very, very urban community. They have really great gardens. One of the best Japanese gardens that I've visited ever is here. They just have a fantastic Japanese garden. They have a massive rose garden. It's incredible. I can't get over the size of the rose garden, and they really do a great job with it. They also have incredible conservatories. They've got this great Victorian architecture to the conservatories, and it's just a beautiful garden. It's a really nice asset to the local community. Brooklyn is also an innovator and a leader in the public garden world. They publish these handbooks, and this is an all-region guide to these different aspects. And I know we have some of these books in the gift shop. Sharon Fitzpatrick, our gift shop manager, would love me to mention that. So you could pick up probably this community gardening book that's published by Brooklyn Botanic Garden here in our gift shop. These are sold throughout the country, and they're great resources, and they're published by the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Brooklyn has also done a lot throughout its entire existence to support vegetable gardening and to support community gardening. One of their newest initiatives is called the Greenbridge Community Garden Alliance. This is a brand new initiative for them. It hasn't been in place very long, but it's really meant to be a networking tool for local community gardens or community gardeners in and around the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. They provide space for the gardeners to lead classes and workshops throughout the growing season. So these are gardener-led classes. They're not classes that the garden puts on themselves. They're gardener-led classes. But it's a great support for the local community and a great support for the community gardeners in the area. But the best thing about the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, from my perspective, is their children's garden. Brooklyn, I mentioned, was started in 1910. And by 1914, they built a children's garden. It's the oldest operating children's garden in the world, almost 100 years old at this point. And it started in 1914. And it was only the second official garden to be named at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. So, I mean, it was up there on the priority list. They wanted, some kind of an ornamental garden, and then they wanted a children's garden. And they wanted the children's garden to focus on vegetables. And so these are some great historic photos that come from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. This is 1928, some kids out gardening at the garden. These are Brooklynites out there gardening in the gardens there at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Brooklyn Botanic Garden has kept that tradition of inspiring children to get involved with community gardens, and they've built a ton of programming around it. They have great mentoring programs. They have great hands-on horticulture, hands-on gardening programs for kids. Through this, it's about a 3-acre vegetable garden, and it's really nothing but it's a small urban farm essentially there on the property. Have any of you seen the children's garden at Brooklyn Botanic Garden? Okay, so a few of you know what I'm talking about, but not that many. It's a fantastic spot, and if you're there, stop in and check out the garden over the summer, because they always have a ton of kids running through the place, really getting their hands dirty and just really enjoying connecting with the soil, connecting with food, and enjoying that community involvement. This is one of their programs called Spring City Farmers. This is a 7-week program they run through the spring. It runs Friday afternoons, I think, from 4:30 to 5:30 for first graders through 8th graders. They involve older students who've been through this program and other programs in mentoring the kids. So first graders show up. They're working with a high school student to plant a vegetable garden. They're weeding. They're watering. They're planting planting, they're sowing seeds, they're harvesting, they're cooking. They have a small kitchen right there in the middle of the vegetable garden. And so that the kids are really able to experience a community garden on the property of Brooklyn Botanic Garden like none other. It's a great experience for kids in the local community. They also have a gardening apprenticeship program. And this is really meant for kids who are a little bit older, and it's leadership development, and it's developing job skills, and it's empowering them to be active, engaged, and positive members of their community. This is the Garden Apprentice Program description, and it's a great way for teens to learn about urban agriculture and the environment while working in one of the most exciting public gardens in the world. Apprentices can work their way up the 4-tier program, potentially earning a paid position as a senior apprentice. And they have dozens of kids that come back year after year, all throughout their high school career. They come back and they participate in this program every summer because they just really enjoy the interaction with the public. They get to lead public demonstrations. They get to mentor younger children, and they just get to learn about growing plants and botany and their environment. And it's a great community asset and a great way to reach the local community through vegetable gardening. One of the most important things that it does is it develops job skills, including teamwork, communication, and responsibility in the kids that participate in the program. The last garden I'd like to talk about this morning is the Chicago Botanic Garden. And I have to admit, this is my all-time favorite garden I've ever been to in the world. I love Chicago Botanic Garden. It's just a fantastic spot. Now, Chicago Botanic Garden is really unique. You can see from this map, it's built on a series of islands. I don't remember how many islands there are. This is an old river that ran through the north part of Chicago. They dammed the river, and they started building these islands and building ornamental gardens on top of the islands. It's a fantastic garden. There are dozens of different garden areas. In addition to the ornamental landscape, and this is something that isn't really well known, Chicago Botanic Garden has a really strong research emphasis. They actually employ 40 PhDs on staff. So they have 40 full-time PhDs doing nothing but plant conservation research at Chicago Botanic Garden. These guys are just involved in so many different ways. They have a really impressive educational program for adults and for youth. They have partnerships with local universities where professionals in the field can earn continuing education credits through several local schools. They also have a graduate partnership with Northwestern University where PhD students can study under a PhD scientist there in their new science center. Chicago is one of only 10 gardens in the U.S. that's accredited by the American Association of Museums. That's a really big deal. There aren't that many museums that are accredited by AAM, and there are only 10 gardens that are accredited, so it's a really well-respected institution. But they have a growing emphasis on community gardening that I've really seen evolve and develop over the last 8 to 10 years, which is impressive, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. These are just some images of the garden. The top is the newest ornamental garden they have. It's called Evening Island. There's a nice little bridge that walks you out there. They also have this Japanese garden, which is really striking, in the Linden Alley. You can see they're very formal gardens, but just a ton of different variety, a ton of great gardens all throughout. I think they're about 36 acres altogether at Chicago Botanic Garden. This is their newest building. This is a LEED Gold certified building. This is their research and science center. And if you visited Chicago Botanic Garden lately, you've had an opportunity to walk into this science center. They have all their scientists kind of like monkeys behind plexiglass. And so you can watch them do their research. It's really cool. So you walk down the center aisle, and you've got scientists in lab coats on either side, and you can watch them do their thing. So it's a great building. It's really innovative. It's like I mentioned, it's LEED certified. It got gold certification. It actually sits atop a rain garden. So the entire building is on stilts, and all the water is captured underneath it. It's a really innovative design. The top also is just covered in green roofs. They have green roof research plots on top of the building. So it's a great example of a building, but it really speaks to the emphasis that they place on plant conservation and research. One of my favorite parts of the Chicago Botanic Garden is their fruit and vegetable garden. And I mentioned earlier in my talk that I feel like a lot of public gardens that have vegetable gardens aren't really innovators in vegetable gardening. They're not really doing anything that I couldn't do in my backyard or that you couldn't do in your vegetable garden at home. Chicago's a good exception to that. I feel like they have a really great vegetable garden. It's striking, it's beautiful, it's interesting, and it's not something that you could do at home. Most of their vegetable garden is just outstanding. It's really well done. But my favorite element of the garden is this outdoor kitchen. As an educator and someone who runs cooking demonstrations every once in a while here at Brookside, I'm so envious of this kitchen. It's incredible. But they run from the end of May through the end of August. They run chef's demonstrations every Saturday. They do classes through this. It gets a ton of use, and all the produce is directly from the garden itself. So it's just a great, great tool, a great resource for the garden to have this kitchen. One of the newest initiatives at the Chicago Botanic Garden is their community garden section of their organization. This started in 2003, and in 2003 they had 1 part-time staff member, and now that's grown to about 6 full-time staff members. And they have urban farms and urban agricultural sites throughout the city. I think they have 4 farms directly for their Green Youth Farm program, which I'll talk about in a second. But this has really seen a lot of growth. And it's also seen a lot of press and recognition for Chicago Botanic Garden that hadn't been there previously. Green Youth Farm, I think, is just a shining example of what almost every public garden in the country could aspire to do. This is a program that really empowers high school students to get involved in their community, to grow vegetables, to generate an entrepreneurial spirit, and to really develop job skills for the green-collar industry. It's a summer program for high school students. It's 8 weeks over the summer. They work 40 hours a week, so they're there a lot. And it starts in the spring, so they have to start early in the spring and then transition over to full-time in the summertime. They grow vegetables in 1 of 4 urban farms throughout the city. They do a lot of other educational programs. They talk about nutrition. They talk about art. They do a lot of art projects to help enhance the ornamental value of their urban farms. They do a lot of community service projects. They donated a lot of their produce to the local community. And each summer they do some type of an entrepreneurship project. Last year I think they created a cookbook, and so it was a cookbook all done by Green Youth Farm, and that's a revenue source for them, but it's also a great way to teach kids about being entrepreneurs and empowering them to think about improving their lives. The next program, and this is a new one for them, is Windy City Harvest, and this is really more for people who've graduated from high school, but it still focuses on youth. And again, it's about building that green-collar industry and building skills that are important for that green-collar industry in kids who really don't have a lot of opportunities in the city. This picture, it's kind of hard to see. This is Senator Durbin. Senator Durbin visited their Windy City Harvest site last year, and then so they got a lot of recognition from local officials and federal officials and the national community for this program. It's a really innovative program, and it's really done a lot for an otherwise unlikely to succeed population in Chicago. Like Green Youth Farm, it involves kids and older kids in vegetable gardening. It's a 9-month program altogether. They actually spend about 6 months in the classroom and in the greenhouse, really learning all the aspects of sustainable urban agriculture. Following that 6-month educational program, they have a 3-month paid internship in the garden, in the farm at Windy City Harvest. They're really training kids for green-collar jobs, and they have a partnership with the Richard Daley College so that kids can earn a certification from the Richard Daley College that they've gone through this sustainable agricultural program. It's a great resource for the community and just a shining example of what public gardens can do with just a little bit of emphasis on encouraging and supporting the local community gardens in their areas. But we're back to this slide again. This is Brookside. This is last year. This was our Children's Day event. As you know, we're right in the middle of 3 years of food programming. We partnered, Lynn Richard, who's our children's program horticulturist, partnered with a local farm to provide a farmer's market during Children's Day. This was a great benefit. People who came to Children's Day got to buy fresh produce right there. It was unexpected, and I think people really enjoyed it. But this is an example of what I think a lot of public gardens could aspire to do. Partner with local communities, partner with local vegetable gardens, partner with local farmers, and really try to support edible landscaping and try to support vegetable gardening and those community gardeners in your area as much as you possibly can, because the rewards are endless. And I think what I've shown you today with the 3 gardens that I've highlighted, there's some really innovative, thoughtful leaders out there in our industry, in the public horticultural field, who are doing some great things. And I think it's high time that every public garden kind of step up and really try to emphasize the importance of vegetable gardening to their community, and trying to reach people through food is just a fantastic way to broaden your audience and to really reach out to those who may not visit you on a regular basis. So I'm hopeful that we can do this again this year, and I'm hopeful that you see this as a regular occurrence at public gardens throughout the country. I just think it's a great way for our industry to support all of you as community gardeners in your area. So thank you very much for hearing my spiel this morning. I appreciate it.